Good evening. Today is Wednesday, February 19th, and I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting. We have, Jen, you might want to just turn me down just a little bit. Thank you. Echoing out there. We're going to change the order slightly. I'd like to bring number 10.1 up following number 7.1. We have the consultant in the gallery here with us, so we'd like to give her an opportunity to present earlier. Also, there were some additional attachments to item 8.4 staff report regarding the bounty development. There were a few paper copies at the back tonight. They were not attached immediately to the agenda, so we want to include those. Also, there is a copy of Councillor Toth's SCRD report at the back that we'd like to include as well. So with those amendments, I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And let you know that we have Eric, so Councillor Scott and Councillor Rowe on the, they've zoomed in, so that's why I have my laptop here. They can see me, I can see them. Councillor Lamb will not be joining us this evening. He is away, but he's also sick, so he's not here this evening. All right, so move forward. First item on the agenda, 5.1, minutes of the 7 p.m. regular council meeting. I'd like a motion to adopt. Moved, seconded. Any errors or omissions before we move that forward? Okay, so look, all those in favor? Adoption, thank you. Item 7.1. That's the minutes of the Community Investment Program Grant Review Committee. And this is for receipt and endorsement. Motion for that, moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
So we'll move to item 10.1. And item 10.1 is a report on the Sunshine Coast Childcare Action Plan. And we have with us Marie Stanborough from CNS Planning Group. So if you push the button, your presentation will be up there, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm presenting on the Sunshine Coast Childcare Action Plan. My name is Maria Stanborough. I was the lead planner on this. I'm introducing very quickly the team. John Foster, he's a planner with 35 years experience in social planning, and he provided a lot of insight into the project. And Liquor Geospatial with Aaron Liquor and his team provided the mapping, and we'll include that into the PowerPoint. So the Sunshine Coast Childcare Action Plan is out of the provincial dedication of $1.3 billion to improve childcare across the province. The town of Gibsons, the district of Sechelt, and the Sunshine Coast Regional District partnered to secure funding to oversee the action plan. And the project started in mid-July, and it's concluding tonight with the presentation to you. We'll also be doing a presentation to the town of Gibsons and the SCRD following this presentation. The key objectives were to understand the issues of providing quality, affordable, and accessible childcare. This is by the province's definition on the Sunshine Coast, and to make recommendations on how to make improvements. So the steps taken included the research and data collection, which was from July to November. We did extensive community consultation from September to November. We did analysis and provided targets for childcare spaces. This was really the mandate of the province, who wanted to know what numbers are we looking at, and then how can we provide funding for that. I came up with 5 recommendations, and this was done jointly with the steering committee, and that was concluded in January. And then we provide our key findings. So a snapshot for you to understand childcare on the Sunshine Coast as of the fall of 2019. And this excludes preschools because they're only a few hours a day, and from what we heard from the parents, they're really looking for full-time daycare. So in terms of full-time licensed daycare, there's 62 spaces, or there were in the fall of 2019, for children 0 to 3 years old, and that was 580 children. So approximately 1 in 9 children have access to childcare of that age, so 11% of children can access full-time licensed daycare at that age. So between 3 and 5 years old for full-time licensed daycare, the scenario is a bit better. There are 294 spaces for 665 children, so approximately 1 and 2.5 children, or 44% of children of that age, have access to full-time licensed daycare. And for before and after school care, this is where the numbers are the lowest. So we're looking at children between 6 and 12 years old. There are 513 spaces for 2,965 children, so approximately 1 in 6, or 17% of children, can access before and after school care. In terms of comparing this to other communities, I included the Comox Valley here. It was another study we did in very comparable communities, and you see that your ratios are about the same, 17% of childcare spaces for children under 12. The provincial average is 18%, and you can see across different communities, it ranges from 17% to about 30% for West Vancouver. And it's really about the access and affordability and quality that can be provided depending on different resources in the community. So it's really varied from each community. You'll see that rural communities like the Sunshine Coast have more challenges. We mapped this out for you in terms of, you can see that where it is the deepest red is where there's the least amount of childcare available, and this is typical in terms of more rural areas. It's harder to have accessible childcare, and that's within a 20-minute drive of families. So you can see that a lot of the area of the Sunshine Coast, it's very difficult to find childcare for children under 3 years old. And then we mapped it out for children between 3 and 5 years old. It improves. It's still not great, but it's definitely better than for infants and toddlers, and that has to do a lot with the licensing requirements. For young children, you require more staff for fewer children, so it's just harder to have the spaces available. And then for, again, before and after school care, you see very similar colors to what you saw for the infant and toddler. So it's not a great situation along the Sunshine Coast. It was often referred to as a crisis when we talk to people. We did a composite study of where we saw potentially the highest risk families for accessing. It's a composite figure of low income families that spend 30% or more on rental, on housing, Indigenous families, and new immigrants. And the area that we identified as having a higher percentage of these families was downtown Sechelt, and that is somewhat in relationship to overall density as well. So in terms of why this happened, well, one of the key issues that came up was just lack of staff. So early childhood educators are not well paid. They require college education. If an educator has infant toddler care or extra support needs care in their repertoire, they've had to go to school longer for that. It's a demanding job, not often with any benefits. Often they don't even get breaks. And it's very emotionally and physically demanding, so there's a high burnout as well. So lack of staff was a key issue. The changing demographics, we're seeing more and more families with 2 parents who are working, so they really need to have childcare at a younger age for their children. Lack of extended family to provide childcare, and there was historically a move of younger families to the Sunshine Coast. It's also a very complicated system to navigate. So what we heard from childcare providers is that they're having to work with a lot of different ministries and agencies. And just a quick snapshot of that, it's the Ministry of Children and Family Development is their key agency that they work with for funding. But they also have to work with Vancouver Coastal Health Authority to provide licensing requirements. They work with the local governments for bylaws, for permitting. They work with nonprofit boards if they're a nonprofit organization. And they might also work with the school district, often for before and after school care. They're looking at having that in schools. So there's a lot of different people that they're working with, a lot of different agencies, and all the while they're doing a very challenging work. And I just wanted to highlight also that what we're seeing more and more is children with extra support needs. The average is about 14% for the Sunshine Coast of parents who have children with extra support needs. So this is a big shift in the last few years. People who've worked in the industry for a while say they're seeing more and more complex needs from families. So in terms of recommendations, we have 5 recommendations. The first is to endorse the targets for childcare spaces, and this is over a 10-year period. So an additional 180 full-time licensed daycare spaces for children 3 to 5 years old, additional 380 full-time licensed daycare spaces for children up to 3 years old, so that's for the infants and toddlers, and additional 900 spaces for licensed before and after school care for children. And this is really requiring a lot of changes in the whole system. So it's really a recognition of the need for the childcare spaces and recognizing that it'll take a lot of work to get there, many different levels of government working together. The second recommendation is to advocate for a universal childcare system. This came from the direction of the steering committee for this project, and that's quality, affordable, and accessible childcare. To continue to develop initiatives to attract and retain early childhood education workers. Again, this is from all 3 levels of government, primarily the provincial government in terms of subsidies for training, wage enhancements, but also federal funding, especially for funding for First Nations programs. And the local government has a role to play in supporting creating low-cost facilities, which allows more funds to go towards paying staff. The fourth recommendation is to look at a streamlined approach to childcare across British Columbia. In the report, there's a little bit more information on this. Other provinces have childcare administered through their education departments, their ministries of education, and that's seen as a more streamlined, straightforward way to have childcare throughout the province, but there's a lot of work to be done on that as well. And the fifth recommendation is to create a joint childcare committee for the Sunshine Coast. And just want to highlight that the steering committee included representatives from the town of Gibsons, from the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and from the District of Sechelt. And that's 3 levels of government who were committed to this process through the staff. And John Foster, who's been working in social planning for 35 years, highlighted this as a fantastic advantage that the Sunshine Coast had, that there was that commitment at a staff level. And so the steering committee acknowledged that they would be willing to transition into the idea of a joint child care committee if this was supported by local governments. And there was also representation by the Vancouver Coastal Health, the Sunshine Coast Community Services, Capilano U that has a child care program, local businesses, and School District 46 on the steering committee. And other members could be identified, could be invited as identified by the JCC. In the report, there's immediate actions that can be taken by the JCC, short-term and medium to long-term. And I've put a little snapshot here of what those could be. The first, of course, being endorse the idea of these targets for new childcare spaces. So that's a quick snapshot of the report. I think you all have a copy of it. And if you have any questions or comments, again, my name is Maria Stanborough.
Thank you very much. I'll look to council for any questions. Anybody here? Councillor McLean?
One thing that stood out to me was the inability to hire enough staff. One thing in the report that was mentioned in the report is that some facilities do not have the full capacity to fit the building because they don't have enough staff. Do you have any idea of what the total number of slots we could fill if we were fully staffed?
No, I'm sorry, I don't actually have that number. I know that it's a real juggling act here, and that's why I said it was a snapshot of fall 2019. So the Sechelt First Nation has a childcare facility on site, and their band supported a wage increase for all their staff. So they were able to hire more staff because of the wage increase, which meant that staff moved over from other agencies, other childcare services. So I don't know what the total number is just to start, to try and make sure every existing facility can have childcare, but it's an ongoing struggle.
And to follow up on that, since the report cites a low wage leading to this lack of employees, have you seen any successful efforts to raise that wage, particularly given that we as a local government don't operate any childcare spaces? So most of them are privately or not-for-profit run.
Well, as mentioned, the Sechelt First Nation did that, and they did it through their own funding, through their band council funding, and took that initiative. The provincial government has increased wages by, I think it's up to $2 for this year, $2 per hour. So there's that initiative. And it's a real juggling act, because if you pay your staff more, then you have to get more funds from somewhere else. So it's really if the province, or if there's more resources to support childcare facilities overall, to lower their costs, and there's a number of actions that can be taken that way, then that funding can be juggled back into providing more funding for staff.
Councillor Scott or Rowe, do either of you have any questions you'd like to ask the consultant?
No, I'm good here. Matt touched on my questions.
Councillor Rowe?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much for the work done on this. So it was really telling. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. You indicated it's a mandate of the province to try and find the numbers. So does this report, is it going to the province? How are they actually going to get the results of this information?
Yes, this report will be going to the province. With the funding came a spreadsheet that was provided by the province, and it had the numbers that they were using from Statistics Canada for population base. And as part of the work, we were to fill in the number of existing facilities, who can go to those facilities, what age groups, how many children are at those facilities, that sort of thing. So at the end of the day, the province gets a spreadsheet with this information, and as well, the final report will be going to them.
Thank you. Yeah, follow up?
So following up on that question, is there anything that is particularly unique about the Sunshine Coast circumstances? I understand childcare is an issue right across the province, but obviously when applying to the province for funds, we need to show that we have a greater need. So have you seen that in your experience?
Well, we did complete the Comox Valley Childcare Action Plan recently, and as I mentioned, they're very similar types of communities in terms of having a large geographic area, some areas that aren't as densely populated but still needing childcare, parents who can't necessarily go long distances or don't have the means to travel easily, that may not have two cars. So in terms of that, the Sunshine Coast is similar, I would say, to other more rural communities, having those sorts of challenges. And the other thing I think that's really, and I'll just mention again, unique to the Sunshine Coast is what we saw as a intergovernmental partnership or collaboration, which is a really fantastic, I think, first step.
All right, you also mentioned that 14% of the children need extra support. So I know that Capilano University is offering the training for 0 to 3, right? 0 to 5, whatever the age group. Mm-hmm. Where do they get the training to deal with special needs students or children? Or does that come with experience?
No, it's a separate certificate for extra support needs, and it's another, I believe it's 6 months of classes, because of the way the classes are structured. So you just might not be able to take all the classes at one time, so it'll be spread out over 6 months. So it's another further commitment. Some people do it while they've got their early childhood education certificate, and then they will do that on top of it. But it is more training, and it's the same for infant toddler. It's more training for 0 to 3 years old.
So I know there are bursaries for the tuition for the first 2 years, right? So the 3 to 6, and then you take the extra year and you do the 0 to 3. Are the bursaries available for the other special needs training?
I'm afraid I can't answer that. And I also do know that the bursaries ran out. So it was very, very well subscribed to. And the amount that the province has set aside has been used up, and hopefully there will be new funding becoming available again.
That would be a good thing. All right, any other questions? Councillor McLean.
All right, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to our next discussion, which is the recommendations. But since we have you here, I'm going to ask you a question about the recommendation that we support universal childcare. So I'm going to show my ignorance. I don't have children, and I don't know a lot about the childcare system. What makes the universal childcare system really this ideal situation that we should be advocating for?
Wow, okay, that's sort of a dissertation there, but Universal childcare system, if you look to Quebec, that's what they have. They have a system where the province supports it quite significantly so that childcare is accessible for as low as $5 a day for families. And what it means is that there's oversight by the province for childcare delivery and to work to ensure that there's quality, that it's licensed, that it's regulated, that it's affordable, and that it's meeting the needs of all children. So a universal childcare system is one that moves away from this sort of what we have is a quite piecemeal system right now, and where the province as an entity would oversee all the delivery of the services from a more regulated perspective. Right now, we do have unregulated childcare, and parents who are so desperate for any kind of childcare will have their children, basically go where they can go, kind of thing. So it's quite a financial commitment from the province, and I don't know if you looked at the budget. There's no current initiative to implement $10 a day daycare, which would be the universal childcare system in this budget. But it does sound like in time this is something that the province does intend to do. But it will, I think, take vigilance on the part of governments and individuals and organizations to keep it front and foremost. Does that answer the question? It's a little, okay.
Okay, I'm going to look at one of the other recommendations you made, and that's that we have a joint child care committee. So we are working together up and down the coast, and our staff are very diligent in bringing this forward. I think as elected officials, we're also very much aware of the steps that we need to take, and your report lays them out for us. So what would be the advantage of actually having that committee, other than overseeing that, which I think we're going to be having come forward anyway? Like, what would another committee bring us?
The Joint Child Care Committee would be a way to keep the action moving forward. And there's that saying that if you don't document it, if you don't write it down, if you don't create numbers around it, you might lose the focus on it. If it's not recorded, if it's not tracked, we're not quite sure if we can see if we're doing a good job. So the idea is the Joint Child Care Committee would come together, see how many new child care spaces are being developed, are we getting closer to the targets, that sort of thing.
So with that, it would be maybe meeting every 6 months or once a quarter or something like that?
And again, that would probably be from the committee themselves to determine. I think, and Marina could sort of speak to this, I think they were talking about quarterly.
All right. Any other questions of the consultant? All right. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your presentation. I look forward to seeing you at the regional district. You'll see a couple of faces from the table up there as well.
Thank you very much.
All right, so let's move to the recommendations in item 10.1. So the first one is that the report from the community map planner be received. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And then the other three recommendations. What would you like to do with those? Councillor Toth?
I'm happy to endorse them as they are, so I'll move that we adopt them.
Okay, so that's that council endorse the childcare space targets as identified in the action plan. That council write a letter to the Provincial Minister of Children and Family Development indicating support for a universal childcare system. We could potentially do that as a group up and down the coast. And that we write a letter and send it along with a copy of this plan to the other local governments and First Nations to determine support for the Joint Child Care Committee recommended in the action plan. So that was moved. Is there somebody who'd like to second that? Seconded. And would anybody like to speak to it? Councillor McLean?
I'd like to separate item 3.
Okay, so 2 and 4 separate. Are you okay with that? Perfect. Yep. Okay, so we're looking at recommendations 2 and 4. And would anybody like to speak to 2 and 4? Councillor McLean?
Yeah, I'm in full support of both of these. I think it's really important that we set goals for ourselves that are based in science and the study that we have done, and that we monitor them. So I would like to see this committee formed so we can follow up with these and keep ourselves accountable.
Okay, I think this is the childcare issue is something that was brought up a lot during the election, actually, because this was one of the top needs that younger families brought to our attention. It actually has a huge impact on economic development and on the support and care of our families. Financially, if they cannot find space for their young children, they can't return to the workforce. And given the level of wages of a lot of the jobs on the Sunshine Coast, in many cases that means they need to leave because they can't stay here and support their families. So it's nice to have the numbers, it's nice to have that support, and I think, going forward as local governments, we need to put some emphasis on this and see what we can do to make it happen. So thank you for the work. Councillor Toth.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that before my wife and I moved up here with our daughter, we had her in a preschool program that we were quite fortunate to get her into, and it was $850 a month, and we paid it because we needed our daughter in care. Once we got up here, the programs that we found were not to the same level as what we had her in the city. Not quite as expensive, but still pretty expensive. So I'm all in favor of more childcare spaces, and when we get to item 3 or recommendation 3, I'm absolutely supportive of that as well.
Councillor Kuster.
I am in support of this as well. I mean, when Kayla was going to before school, we were paying $850 to $1,000 for one child care because we both worked. So I definitely see the need, especially for families that have, lower income and they need to be working, and it's a struggle to even pay for those services and find them. So,
Councillor Rowe or Scott, did you want to speak?
I just think I agree with what everyone's saying. I think this really gives us some good evidence-based documentation to advocate for at UBCM, et cetera. And I just know from working at the hospital how hard it is for people to get back to work to find childcare, and they're making decent money. So I think it's a problem all the way around, and I don't think local government's in the space anymore that we can say we don't do windows. I think we have to advocate for when we know there's a need in the community. So I'm in support of, I guess we're just talking to 2 and 4, but I'm in support of all 2, 3, and 4. Thanks.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, no, I fully endorse all respect. There's a way for us to find some extra funding to put it together. Let's do it.
All right. So we have recommendations 2 and 4 in front of us. All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
So recommendation 3. Councillor McLean.
Now, has this one been moved or no? Okay, then I'm going to propose an alternative motion that council refer to the Joint Child Care Committee to draft a letter regarding universal child care.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? I like the idea. My concern is that would delay in getting this moving forward. And I think if we can get the letter moving out the same time that we have this report going forward, I think we're going to have a little more support on the other end from the government.
Yeah, so logic for that is it's universal child care is not defined in the report very well. And I think there's multiple aspects of it. It's a very complicated program. And I'd like to see a better definition that is presented. And I believe the best way to draft that is by going to the experts who know it, not by doing it ourselves. So that's why.
Okay, I follow up on that. You weren't around at this table probably about 3 or 4 years ago, when there was a huge push on universal childcare in the province. And this was brought forward to the province by a number of advocates. So there is, if we can dig it up, but there's the pretty defined term around universal childcare talks about $10 a day. I mean, I've got documentation and stuff at home. So I think this is something that those at the province will be very familiar with. So it's, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think we need to go that far. What I would like to see in the letter, though, is that we don't approach this letter as a council, but that we approach it as governments on the Sunshine Coast, as a region, so that, as at UBCM, where we went to some of the ministers with our issues jointly, I'd like to see us do this as well, jointly on the Sunshine Coast. So I would suggest that it be something like, council, write a letter to the Provincial Ministry of Children and Family Development indicating support for a universal childcare system, and have all the governments on the Sunshine Coast sign on to that letter and support to the province. So I'd like to see that go forward. And then as you go forward and do your presentations, we can follow up behind and ensure that we get the support for the letter. Okay, so motion, second, okay. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I'll just add, not to the motion, but just that we consult with some members, including our staff members that worked on this committee, to draft the letter.
Okay, thank you. All right, all those in favor? Thank you very
Aye.
much. All right, thank you. So we're going to move back into our agenda to item 8.1, bylaws. This is from the Workplace Advisory Planning Commission Amendment Bylaw. Yes, okay. Sorry, I was thinking it was something else. Item 8.1, Advisory Planning Commission Bylaw Amendment and Commission Composition. First, a motion to receive the report. All those in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's customary in the new year to report upon the composition of the Advisory Planning Commission, as members do have staggered terms, and therefore some members' terms expired at the end of 2019, and they are seeking resolution on their membership status. So at present, the Advisory Planning Commission has 9 members. At the end of 2019, 4 of the 9 members' terms expired. Of the 4, 3 have expressed their willingness to move on. They've committed their time as volunteer to this committee and ready to move on. And 1 of the 4 would like to remain. So that leaves us with 8. There's been some discussion in the last few months about having more members on the commission. This comes from individual members of the APC, as well as looking at the quorum. The quorum, as defined presently in the bylaw, is half of the APC. So there was support to add more members, but that comes with a concern that with more members, more are also required to achieve quorum. So we're trying to strike a balance here, whereupon suggesting an amendment to the bylaw to increase the overall composition from 9 to 11 would be good. In which case that would require advertising to seek additional members, and also an amendment to seek a fixed number for quorum. And we've proposed 4. We would hope that there's more than 4, but it's at every meeting. But it's balanced with what we have seen earlier in the fall, whereupon we think we have a meeting, people show up, applicants show up, and then last minute we don't have a meeting, or we're phoning people on cell phones and, oh yeah, I'm in the parking lot, I'll be right there, kind of thing, right? So if we have a fixed number, it's a little bit easier to identify than a 50%. So the recommendations are here to consider a bylaw amendment to increase the overall composition to 11, with 9 of the 11 being District of Sechelt residents, and establishing a quorum at 4, and to advertise for additional membership. And upon completion of the advertisement period, we'd report back with potential new members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Toth.
I know that historically it hasn't been a requirement for all the members to be residents of the District of Sechelt. I know we've got 1 member who isn't. Is there a reason why it's 2 that don't have to be members of the District of Sechelt, or residents of the District of Sechelt? I just think that if you take the quorum to 4, and only 9 of the 11 need to be residents of the District of Sechelt, you could end up with an APC meeting where half your quorum is non-residents.
Do you want to address that?
Speaking to the residency, I was following the term that's within bylaw 578. I hadn't, to be honest, considered the fact that 2 of the 4 could be non-resident. It's certainly council's discretion. The idea is specifically that this is a District of Sechelt Advisory Planning Commission. There are multiple other advisory planning commissions on the Sunshine Coast for the electoral areas, for example, but this one, the idea is it is belonging to District of Sechelt rather than a regional or shared, but ultimately council discretion in that regard.
And addressing that, I know that there are lots of people who don't live in Sechelt, but who do business in Sechelt, have their business here, or it's their primary place of interaction. So actually have a commitment to what happens in the district. So, I mean, I'm okay with it going either way. I think another piece that comes forward is we're looking for people who have specific background and knowledge, and we may not be able to have all of those from the District of Sechelt either. So this opens it up so that we actually have the expertise that we need. I know that the last year, I think when we put the committee together, we had a broad range from up and down the coast of people with all kinds of qualifications. And that's what we're looking for, because they then have the expertise in looking at these applications that come forward, and they can advise us. So I don't want to limit that either. And I don't know how that would show up inside of changing it to being all of them District of Sechelt. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of everything proposed. Bringing more people into our planning process is a good thing. Particularly, APC is a good step if anyone is thinking of running in the next election. I know that's pretty far away, but it's, if you are interested in this politics thing, we just allowed 2 more people to get a good crash course in it. In terms of the issue with out of Sechelt people serving on it, at the end of the day, the discretion to appoint people to this committee is at council's discretion. If there is concern, we can appoint fewer people, but by making this bylaw 2 people, it means we cannot go above that, so it gives us flexibility. Say we don't get too many people applying, we can get those seats filled, or do however we like, because at the end of the day, it's our decision.
Any other comments? All right, how would you like to move forward? Councillor McLean.
I will move recommendation 2, that bylaw amendment 578-1-2020 receive first, second, and third reading. That recommendation 3, that the district advertise to seek up to 5 new members of the public to serve on the District of Sechelt Advisory Planning Commission. And recommendation 4, that staff report to council to consider appointments to the Advisory Planning Commission after the advertisement period.
And that's seconded. Any further comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So let's move to item 8.1B. This is bylaw 578-1-2020, being a bylaw to amend District of Sechelt Advisory Planning Commission bylaw number 578-2019. I'd look for someone to move first reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
And second reading, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Third reading, moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much.
Aye.
All right, so move on to item 8.2. This is 2019-2023 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 581-1. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved. So somebody seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
And Mr. Curry.
Excuse me. Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. I just did a quick PowerPoint presentation so I could explain why we do a financial plan bylaw amendment, and also just to explain some of the recommended changes in front of you today. So my report today is for a financial plan bylaw amendment. We're also recommending to amend the financial plan bylaw for greater consistency with the year-end financial results. This ensures that any changes with the budget are authorized and in compliance with provisions for the community charter. What we're amending in the financial plan, this can be resolutions by council, budget transfers between departments, or emergency items as they arise. This could be for resolutions by council, it could be confirmed grant funding or reports to council throughout the year to request for grant projects, and the grants are received, which weren't captured originally in the financial plan. So now we come back and add them to the financial plan. So majority of the recommendations today were provided by council resolution throughout 2019. Some other means of these changes could be from council directed initiatives. So council could request to allocate funds by decision in council meeting and spend it against the contingency. So that could arise throughout the year as well. The last usually option is emergency items. So these are expenditures that are deemed necessary but were not included in the original financial plan. So something may arise that where we have to fix a boiler or an HVAC system that we can't delay, and it must be done right away. So this requested changes here would capture them into the financial plan. The changes before you today from the general fund include consulting services. This is $80,000 we're moving from the engineering department for geotech monitoring required at Sea-Watch. The budget was located in the engineering department, and we've moved it up to a category called risk management, and that's where the expenses have been posted to. So we're matching the expenses with the budget with this request. The water conservation study is allocating $5,000 from the contingency, which was approved through council resolution throughout the year. This has matching funds of $10,000 that we've received in a grant. The contract services, this is $21,988 that this was an emergency expense for a failing culvert and storm crossing at Fairway Avenue. So this request is to move funds from our operating contingency to the expense in our budget. The last item here, the Development Equalization Reserve, this is a $52,000 deficit we received throughout the development department. So this is through planning and engineering and the building department. This is the overall deficit between the three departments with the shortage of revenue that we received due to lack of planning applications, less development permits, building inspection and development permits that were issued this year. To summarize just how the year-end landed with each of these departments, planning actually had a $47,000 surplus at the end of 2019. And this, the reason for this is being that we received the grant funds from the ICP. This is the grant funds that were from the prior year expensed, and we received the revenue in 2019, which was not added to budget for 2019. So between that and I believe the revenue finished at $66,000 with a $100,000 budget. So it was still short, but with the offset of the additional grant and then the less expenses for their wages. So we had seen from the timing of hiring the vacant positions, so we had not expensed the wages completely. So that makes up for the deficit, the surplus there. The engineering department is $177,000 short, and expenses finished $95,000 less than budget. So that was the offset here, is that they between a few of the areas in the budget, they came up $81,000 short at the end of the year. And building, again, $17,000 overall, $95,000 short with revenue, and $67,000 less with expenses, bringing us to a total of $52,000. So with this, we request that we move $52,000 from the Development Equalization Reserve to offset these expenses or the deficit through the year. The sewer fund operating changes include transfer a correction actually of 33,000. We had an allocation between the Dusty Road and WRC costs, which was in the budget twice by error. So this is a correction to that, removing the one. And the second item here is we are recommending that we close the refund process for bylaw 223 and 224, which was opened in 2015, where council at the time provided a refund to the property owners in a section of our sewer parcel and sanitary sewer service area. And that refund period has been open since 2015. We have not received a refund request over the last 3 years. In my time that I've been here, I've not seen one that was requested. So we're recommending that we close the refund period and we bring this money into income. The capital plan changes include the airport runway resurfacing project, which was approved by council resolution. This brings it officially into the capital plan for the year as approved by council. The BC Bike Lane project, which is another one that had been approved by council through the year. The Justice building replacement of 2 boilers, also approved by council, and the fan coil heating and air conditioning, which was approved as an emergency expense to have air conditioning for the courthouse. Further, for the changes to the last slide was adds to the capital plan. These are just increases for existing projects. These were already in the 2019 capital plan. So we increased the RCMP facility reception area budget. This was approved by council resolution in June. This includes the values of the increase on top of the existing budget that was approved. The Trail Avenue construction project, this one has a ripple of a few different changes. So essentially the number before you on the second line there is the increase to the portion of the project which is going forward between Toreto Street and Anchor. So that's the increase to the existing budget that's there. The same with the item below, the Trail Ave storm trunk line for the drainage portion of the project. This is the increase to the existing portion of that project, of the existing budget. Then the next slide here is showing the projects removed from 2019. So this was the phase 2 of both of those projects, which have been removed from the plan and rolled forward to 2022 when DCC funds are available. That concludes my visual presentation today. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. And I'll just put the recommendation before council on the screen here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor McLean?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to find the right spot in the presentation. Okay, the parcel bylaw 223 and 224 parcel tax liability. If we close this reserve, will anyone be able to claim this back if they happen to come forward?
My recommendation is that we close it for good. However, you can resolve to deal with them as a one-off, but I would suggest that we close it as a once-off with the idea that most of the properties that received the notice of the refund that were eligible, the property hadn't changed hands. It's the same owner who had paid had already claimed. Knowing that there's likely not any left out there, that we close it for good so that this doesn't come up again in a few years. Also for the sake that for our auditors, they would like to see the liability if we still expect to pay it out. So they would likely rather keep the liability there if we're still going to entertain the refunds.
And similar question, what was our communication process for these refunds? You mentioned we haven't received any in the last 3 years. Have we reached out to anyone in the last 3 years?
We have not reached out to anyone in the last 3 years. There was a bulk mail out to every property owner that was eligible at the time they were issued, but we have not done anything the last 3 years to remind anyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Rowe?
Here I am. question for Mr. Curry. When they were given the notice, was there a time frame identified? In other words, you have 3 years or whatever?
There was no time frame identified in the report or in the minutes from the council meeting at the time.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? So there's a recommendation in front of us. Councillor McLean?
I will move recommendation 2 that council proceed with giving first, second, and third reading to District of Sechelt 2019-2023 Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw number 581-1-2020.
Is there a seconder? Seconded? All those in favor? Oh, sorry?
I'd like to pull the bylaw 223 and 224 personal tax liability.
Okay, and discuss that separately?
I mean, sure.
Okay, so you'd like to move it without that in there?
I would like to, yes, I would like to pass this bylaw without the parcel tax. Reason being, I think we need to do one last push. Give them 1 year to say, we have your money. If you want your money back, you have 1 year left.
Okay, you have a report in here about the work that staff did to identify all of the residents and follow-up. Do you recall? I know I read it. I don't recall the work that staff have done behind the scenes on that.
At the time, like a complete mail-out was done. I believe it was very public, and everyone known had claimed it. So if maybe there's a chance that there's people that are eligible, but unlikely because of properties changing hands, and we wouldn't be looking at refunding the property owners which didn't pay. So that as well is the reason why I believe the remaining amount is likely due to exchange of property and they're not eligible.
Fine.
So we don't have an exact list of the remaining properties.
Not in front of us here, but I have the list of all the refunds that were issued. So we could process of elimination determine who still is owed the refund. Yes.
Yeah, and that's what I'd like to see is do that work, come up with that list, and do one more mailing saying you have a year.
I think that some of the difficulty is, though, we don't know where those people are. For some of them, right? They don't live in the house anymore. They may have moved away, they may have died, and we have no way of finding who they are. So I think it's difficult for staff to actually do a mailing if we don't know where to send the information to.
We send it to the address that physically had the issue, so, and make it very clear that if you're not the property owner during this time, you don't get it.
Mr. Douglas, did you want to comment?
No, my comment was that if it goes to a home that didn't have residents from that period of time, they may get confused and try to come in, but no, they would not get the payment.
So what you're saying is we've already done that in the past. It was very evident. It was all over the paper, all over the radio. We did a lot of that work. You're requesting that staff do that once more. This could potentially come in, you're saying a year?
Yes.
Okay, so then this bylaw could not be approved tonight as presented. It would need to go back and come back. Okay, so I'm going to look to the corporate officer. What would this look like? First of all, we have to find out if we've got council support to move this forward as this.
Why can't,
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
why can't we just move it as is? And as Ben said, if someone comes forward, we can treat it as one-offs.
Okay, that's an option as well. I mean, we can still request inside of that, we can still request that staff do the work and do another mailing to see if any others are identified. What would that do to us inside of our budgeting and our process? we'd probably at the next year, at the end of the year, we would have a budget amendment to deal with those one-offs that would come forward. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I think I'd still I'd still maybe hold a portion of the liability so that we still have this debt that we know we may have to pay. So just on the accounting side, I think that we would still adjust the value that's presented in the bylaw today.
Okay, so.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
How much money were the homeowners getting back, Mr. Curry? Do you recall?
I don't. I can look. It's in the report here.
Oh, I can't see it. I'm just imagining, I can't imagine if I'm getting a refund that I haven't applied for it, if it was that publicly, presented back in 2015. I'm liking the idea that Janice just put forward.
Okay, so we don't know that amount at this point. Would staff be able to handle that if, so we've got two competing ideas here, right? So which would you prefer?
The idea I'd like to come back with the bylaw again, and I'd readjust the liability based on not closing the refund period altogether, but calculating the potential liability with eliminating the, I guess, getting the number down to the realistic number that we believe is we should still pay.
Okay. So where are we at with our process? Okay, so we've moved and seconded the recommendation that is presented as number 2, not voted on at this point. All right, so if we move forward with the recommendation as on the floor, we will approve the bylaw as presented with the amount of money still sitting, the amount of money removed as a liability. Okay, so everybody clear what we're voting on? Councillor Toth.
I just want to point out that the original liability was identified as $352,000, and the decision was made 5 years ago, and this liability, dates back from 2002. It's time to move on. Like 3 years with nobody applying, it's time to move on.
Okay, anybody else like to comment? Councillor McLean? Okay, we'll do Councillor McLean, then Councillor Scott.
Okay. So I understand the motion that we're on. I don't believe that's the same of what staff recommended. I think staff recommended an alternate path, which is coming back to us with another budget amendment next meeting. So kind of just put this aside or defer it to next meeting.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. There's a motion on the floor. So we would need to defeat the motion on the floor and then make a motion that how we'd like staff to proceed, and they would come back with a revised recommendation like that. Councillor Scott, and then we'll go to, okay, Councillor Scott, okay.
Yeah, let's just vote and then we can move forward.
So you want to move forward as is what you're indicating?
No, let's get the vote going so the motion can be defeated, and then we can move forward with the direction that the staff want it.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? All right, so all those in favor of the recommendation as presented? One, okay, move that. So we've got 2 for. All those opposed?
Aye.
And we've got 2 on here. So 4 opposed. The motion is defeated. All right, so we need a recommendation for staff.
I would like to refer this back to staff.
Okay, refer this back to staff for what?
To amend the refund to reflect expected reserve levels.
Okay, and probably also to have them do one more mail out and keep it for a year.
Yep.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? CAO.
Might I suggest that maybe you go with a newspaper advertisement as opposed to a mail out, just to avoid the confusion that we've talked about amongst the current occupants of those homes?
Okay, so maybe it could be just something, refer it to staff. Okay.
What is our motion?
At this time, it's that this bylaw be referred back to staff to amend the refund to reflect expected reserve levels, and to have staff do whether or not you want to do a mail out or a newspaper ad.
Have staff communicate with the affected property owners. That'd be it. Yeah.
Can we just change the word from reserves to liability?
Thank you.
Can we add a date to close after a year? Or to
Yes.
make it official, so this...
Yes? All right, so we'll hear the revised recommendation as soon as Jen has that. Thank you.
That this bylaw be referred back to staff to amend the refund to reflect expected liability levels, and to have staff communicate with the affected property owners with a 1-year expiry date. Oh, Mr.
Does that capture what you're looking for? Fine. All right, thank you. So that, Councillor McLean's making that motion. Is there a seconder for the motion?
I'll second.
I'll move. Okay, seconded. All right, everybody knows what we're voting on? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
And so we've got 2 on there for the in favor. Any opposed? And would you like that recorded? Okay, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to item 8.3. This is the Community Amenity Reserve Fund bylaw. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. I'll second it. All in favor? Thank you. All right, and back over to you, Mr. Curry.
Okay. Thank you. My report today recommends the creation of a community amenity reserve bylaw for the purpose of receiving and spending monies for community amenities. On October 16th, 2019, Council resolved to defer the establishment of the bylaw until a community amenity policy was reviewed and finalized. At this time, the district is finalizing an amenity contribution from a proposed development, and the establishment of a reserve is required for the funds. At this time, we recommend moving forward with the bylaw in order to accommodate the current pending amenity contribution. Council will have the opportunity to review and discuss the policy, the current pending amenity contribution, and how amenities are calculated in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toth.
I just want to identify, and I want to thank staff for including airport improvements in this. I don't think we can pay for the work we need to do at the airport on our own. So if there's an opportunity for a developer to make a contribution up there, I think that's going to be greatly appreciated on the financial side. And I think that the beach accesses and trails being included in here is a great benefit as well. And so I am happy to move recommendation 2 as presented, that council give first, second, and third reading to the District of Sechelt Community Amenity Reserve Fund bylaw number 587/2020.
And that's seconded?
Oh.
Okay.
Yep.
Too slow there, Councillor Rowe.
Oh, wow. Please.
All right, Councillor McLean, comments?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with a question. What would be the decision-making process for the last point under 5.2, other amenities agreed to by council? I essentially view this as a catch-all, so I just want to understand how we make that decision. Would it? I don't know.
Perhaps I'll venture in. Great question, and sure, let's say it could be viewed as a catch-all, but let's say it's a protection against an unforeseen or undescribed amenity that we can't imagine today that might come up 2 years from now or 5 years from now, and it provides us the ability to accept something without having to amend the bylaw. But amenity contributions and decisions on spending funds are always at discretion of council.
Councillor McLean, follow up?
So I'm going to try and make sense of that in my mind. Essentially, a developer would come through, and then at some stage of the approval of the development, we would say this amenity can be put into the reserve. Okay.
So given our presentation earlier, it says in here youth or family-oriented amenities. Would that include daycare? Would they be considered youth or family-oriented amenities? And if not, do we want to have daycare in there?
Childcare facility is actually item Q in the bylaw itself under 4.
Oh, sorry, I missed that then. Oh, okay, 2 different lists, okay. All right, cool, all right, good, it's covered. Thank you. Thank you. I knew I'd seen it somewhere, but I couldn't see it after. All right, any other questions or comments on the recommendation that's on the floor? Oh, okay, all those in favor? Thank you. So let's move to the bylaw. This is on page 51, item 8.3B, District of Sechelt bylaw number 587-2020, a bylaw to establish a community amenity reserve fund for the District of Sechelt. I'll look for first reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Second reading. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And third reading. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you very much. So we move on to our last bylaw of today, zoning and OCP amendment bylaws for Bounty. Thank you, Mr. Curry. This is item 8.4A, Bounty Development Company rezoning application Lot B, Acorn Road, West Sechelt, OCP amendment bylaw number 492-25, 2019, and zoning amendment bylaw number 25-301, 2019. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt of the report? Okay. Discussion on receipt. Thank you.
We just received a package shortly before this meeting containing public hearing material. I'm not willing to consider this because I have not read that package.
Thank you. Any other comment? Okay, so we have the motion in front of us to receive the report as presented. All those in favor? Okay, and Councillor Rowe, how are you voting on this?
Are we receiving the report again? Is that what we're doing?
Yes.
With the additions?
Yes, with the additions.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I don't have them, but I'm sort of with Matt on this.
Okay. Yeah, staff.
Your Worship, thank you. Just for clarification, and only for clarification, all of the correspondence that was in that package that was distributed earlier this evening as part of the agenda did go to council as individual items of correspondence and emails, et cetera, as they come into the office. So just FYI.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joanne. I thought it was in addition to.
Oh, Councillor McLean?
Yeah, I just want to review everything at one point so I have it all in front of me before I make a decision.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a recommendation in front of us that the report presented from the Development Planning Manager be received. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Would you like that recorded? Yep. Councillor, please record that. Thank you. And we'll turn over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Just quickly, we've got the OCP amendment and zoning amendment bylaws presented here following the public hearing. The OCP amendment bylaw has been updated to fix a typo in the preamble section, so it would get third reading as amended. It could also be considered for adoption. The zoning amendment bylaw is ready to be considered for third reading. There's also a proposed change to one of the rezoning conditions based on discussions with the applicant. This would still secure the negotiated amenity payment, but rather than require the amenity payment prior to adoption of the zoning amendment bylaw, we would require the registration of a Section 219 covenant prior to the adoption of the zoning bylaw, and the covenant would restrict any building or subdivision prior to the amenity payment being received. So we're still securing the amenity payment, just not at the time of rezoning in terms of actually receiving the money, but it's secured through having the covenant in place before the rezoning is adopted. So basically ensuring that the property cannot be built on or subdivided until the amenity payment that has been agreed to has been submitted to the district. And that would go in hand with the other covenant that would go on title as part of the second rezoning condition related to the gravel road standard.
Is that the end of your presentation? Yep. Okay, thank you. I have a question for you from page 57. So in your presentation, you have the questions that were brought forward by the people present at the public hearing and have provided answers to them. At the top of page 57, question was, why is the RR3 zone not being offered to other property owners? So when I read that, I was a little confused because I know that when we create a zone, that is available to others in the community. So that was the question that was answered. Could you please clarify what the answer actually means here?
Yeah, I guess what we have as part of any rezoning application when staff are reviewing what is being proposed, there's a variety of approaches to come up with in terms of creating a new zone, amending the zone that already applies to the property, and basically capturing whatever they're wanting to do on the land. In this case, for this application, the approach was settled on to create a new zone. Once that's adopted, it exists in the bylaw at this time only for this particular property, but it would be possible, like any rezoning application in the future, somebody could apply to change the zoning on their property, and they could propose uses similar to the R3 zone or propose to change their zoning to the R3 zone or any other existing zone. It's more like what are they wanting to do on their property as part of their specific application. So it's not something that we've created a new zone, so now it applies beyond an application site, but it forms part of the bylaw coming forward. And it's more about what is somebody proposing to do on their property, and does that fit with an existing zone, or are we creating a new zone or amending a zone to better suit what they're wanting to do?
So what you're saying with that is we won't necessarily take this zone and automatically apply it to other properties that are out there.
No, right now it's just the product of a site-specific application.
Right, but others in the community, if this would fit what they were looking to do with their property, this zone would be available to them as well.
They could propose that.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Toth?
Actually, just sort of to follow up with that same one, do we have, I'm sure we have at least one instance of amending existing zones with site-specific regulations, but there aren't a lot of them, are there, within the district of Sechelt? The practices tended to be to just create new zones, right?
Yeah, there's a mix. I think we have quite a few site-specific regulations in existing zones that apply to particular properties. It's kind of a hodgepodge of different situations. There's no limit on creating new zones. I mean, you look at some zoning bylaws that will have hundreds of zones. Some of them only apply to one property. So it's more what makes sense or what works well in terms of tracking. Sometimes you get too many site-specific regulations in a zone, and the zone itself is bloated with all sorts of site-specific or property-specific regulations. So it really comes down to what works best for the site. And with a new zoning bylaw, all of that would change anyway in terms of new categories and how it's all laid out. So
I'll give you an example. East Porpoise Bay. The industrial lots over there, we did some zoning for them, and the community came and said, in that zone, it is allowed to have a crematorium. We don't want a crematorium in our area. So the zone, right, for those sites, those lots, was revised to remove crematorium.
Yeah, I seem to recall we used it on the Gilligan's property actually as well when we did the rezoning there. So I was just clarifying.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, so we have some recommendations in front of us. Councillor McLean.
I'd like to make a motion to defer this to the next meeting.
Is there a seconder for deferment? You'd like to defer? Seconded? All right, no discussion on deferring, okay? So there's a motion on the floor to defer this to the next meeting. All those in favor of deferring? Councillor Scott and Councillor Rowe, how are you voting on this? Councillor Scott is voting in favor of deferring. Councillor Rowe?
Personally, I don't feel the need, but you know what? I will, in support of my council members, vote for a deferment so that everybody can feel that this application that has been the topic of much discussion is reviewed as much as possible.
Thank you. So all those in favor of deferring? So we have 4 in favor. Thank you. This is deferred to the next meeting. Thank you very much.
And I can just confirm that Councillor Scott voted for.
Councillor Scott voted for, yes.
With his hand.
Yes, he's got his hand up. Thanks. All right.
So quiet.
I know. So moving on to item 10.2. BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program 2020-2021. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
And Mr. Bandera. Excuse me, just wait one moment till the gallery clears.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this, the report, seeking Council approval for applying the grant for BC Active Transportation Grant. Application closing date for this particular grant is tomorrow. Also, staff are seeking Council approval for financial commitment from Sechelt. $205,523 from gas tax. That is covered the 30% of the district contribution. The total estimated cost for the project $685,074. This is the background of this project. It was initiated in 1994 with Associated Engineering. However, this design is not proceeded. The reason, I don't know the reason why is that between 2005 and 2010, the district completed improvement to the entire east side of Wharf Avenue between Golden City Restaurant and Cowrie Street. So you can see that this is before construction with the angle parking backing onto the highway. And after improvement, there's a parallel parking over here. This entire corridor on this side is now improved with safe pedestrian connectivity. In 2015, conceptual design was developed by the district staff, and stakeholder meeting was held on site, as well as the presentation also conducted. There's 4 options, and these are the common stakeholder concerns, including the trespass of vehicle onto private property. That is that we had the both side parking, and then we had to go through the property side, going through each properties. They don't like that one due to some concerns of the loss of parking. That is the main issue they're talking about. And the pedestrian traffic do not have this safe access to businesses because they have to pass the parking area. I will explain only one option here. This similar one, you can see that on this side, we have the parking on both sides, so they don't like that one. Also, they don't like that to going through these properties over here. And they're going through the back lane for the public trespass in their private property. So these all options, the design include 2-meter wide separated sidewalk. That's the separation over here, the planters, and also on this side, separation is with stamped concrete. Mixed parallel and angle parking, and one entrance coming from here, from Dolphin, and restricted access over here. You can see that in and out, and proposed 22 stalls inside and outside. In 2019, the district retained ISL Engineering to complete the detailed design and conduct public consultation process. And this design also we submitted to Ministry of Transportation. They are in favor of that, and we removed the islands over here to provide more parking stalls, and also Ministry of Transportation, they don't like the proposed crosswalk, Midbrook crosswalk here. Their concern is the queue length from the peak traffic time is not adequate. That's their concerns. So they are not in favor to have a Midbrook crosswalk. And this scenario, we have the angle parking for the corner property. Is now called batch 44, I believe. And all here parallel parking along Wharf Avenue, similar to on the other side. So in this case, the total parking stalls, we counted 21 and existing 31. And the potential parking over here are 3. So the reduction of parking is 7. So this is a render of Wharf Avenue improvement, but this is a little bit older. Here we have the parallel, but now our design is angle parking on this side. So these are the design highlights. We need 6x6 cone truncation of this design for northeast corner of lot 5561 Wharf. So you can see here, over here, that we need little cone truncation because we don't have enough room to connect the sidewalk to Dolphin Avenue. So in order to get this 6x6 corner truncation, we are still trying to negotiate with this property owner to improve little the parking over here. And also this project, we're putting a new storm line because storm line is up to somewhere here. There's a problem with these properties, as well as if we put this curb line, there's a problem with the storm issues here. And also 2-meter wide protected sidewalk, one side stamped concrete, other side planters, and mix of parallel and angle parking. One additional entrance from Dolphin Avenue, corner 5561. Proposed 21 stall on site and off site. Additional 3 potential parking and total loss of 7 stalls. The 2019 design highlights continue. Storm main extension to resolve current storm water issues, and street light with ban arms. A potential patio improvement front in the businesses. MOTI review accepted design and provided letter of support is attached to the report. We had a few discussion with the Downtown Business Association, and they are happy with the design, and they endorse the design and provide a letter of support. And also we need the further discussion with the impacted property owners that may take place. This is a financial implication. The total project cost $685,074. The eligible grant is 70%, that is $479,551. The district contribution from gas tax is 30%, that is $205,523, and the application deadline February 20th. So other funding opportunities, the SDBA discussed with us, and they wishes to apply to Island Coastal Economic Trust IST funding. If SDBA is successful that funding for the same project, we could the gas tax fund reallocated for the project. The IST deadline is April 3rd, 2020. This is the end of presentation. If any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Toth.
I'm really happy to see this project finally moving forward. I did have one reservation. If you can back up to the rendering of that wharf and dolphin, that one right there. Just this morning, I was on wharf headed north towards the towards Ford, and I was stopped at the light right at that stop line, and there was a semi that came down the hill to turn the corner, and he was towing an additional trailer. So he was a C-train. And when he turned that corner, even with me back of the stop line, he had to swing most of the way into the Batch 44 parking lot in order to actually make that corner. So it wasn't a problem until I experienced it firsthand, but I have some pretty severe reservations about that corner. And I'm not sure what there is to do about it.
Thank you for your concern. So this is now 75% design complete. For the complete design, we will bring that your concern to our attention to our consultant. They will do auto turn for semi-trailers, and they can figure out what the radius and what is the impact. I think your concern is this area. So yeah, so we will bring that to their attention and to get some other solution on that.
For sure. And maybe it just means moving the stop line back further. I don't know. But yeah, it was one of those things you don't really think about it until you experience it. And it's like, whoa, okay.
We'll do Councillor Kuster and Councillor McLean.
I was just going to agree with Alton because I go to that stop line every day, and I've actually had to back up there when there's no one behind me because they have to do a big swing. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at for sure.
Councillor McLean.
Yeah, if we could just go back another slide or two to the drawings of the current. There we go. Yeah. So in front of the several properties, there's a gap between the existing sidewalk and where we put the new sidewalk. What is the plan for that area that is on private property? Is it essentially just leaving the existing asphalt there?
So this area is a future potential patio area. So they can extend their businesses onto close to the property sidewalk. That will help them, for businesses. The patio is very close to the sidewalks.
Mm-hmm. But that would be the responsibility of the property owners.
Exactly. This is this sidewalk entirely within the highway corridor, except this corner.
Mm-hmm.
So I recall when this first came forward, not the 1994 version, but the newer version, we actually were looking at the property line to come up with some kind of design. And the property line actually is on an angle in front of those properties. So the district actually has more property at the corner where the real estate office is, but we have very little at the other end. And so it was trying to deal with those competing needs, right? So like there you can see it, yeah, there's the property line.
This is the property line.
Yes, so when you come over to those businesses like Bank Montreal at the end over there, there's very little space in front of that. So that would be their property. So it would be up to them to do the improvements. But I understand that we could have some nice patio restaurants there. I have to say I'm disappointed about Ministry of Transport not wanting to have a crosswalk because we're going to have lots of people jaywalking there. It happens. Yeah, they do now. Is there any other alternative? Oh, we're fast. Yeah, go ahead.
So we did another study from ISL to get that one. So, but in this point, we are not going to put the study concerns. Otherwise, if we put that one, then it's getting a delay. So we can bring that one the later date.
Okay, so in other words, the crosswalk is not necessarily gone at this point. We want to go forward with what we've got for the grant application.
Yes.
And that could be something that we could revisit down the road.
Exactly.
Okay,
so,
I like that.
That particular report indicates this queue length is adequate. So we moved, previously it was designed somewhere here. Mm-hmm. So we moved that one a little bit on this side to give additional room over here.
Okay. Perfect. And then the piece about iced tea, I know earlier this year, well, no, not this year. Was it this year? We had iced tea over here? That was last year, end of last year. Time goes fast. And I think at that point, the executive director indicated that there could potentially be support for iced tea for funding something like this, because they have funding that focuses on improvements to downtown areas. So I like that piece as well. Thank you for moving that piece forward. All right, any other questions or comments on this presentation? Okay, Councillor McLean?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I'm really happy to see this. This is an unsafe walking corridor. There are a lot of steep ramps, other obstructions. You're walking in the middle of parking lots. It's unsafe for pedestrians. So to create this will make downtown Sechelt much more walkable. It's a key corridor, so I am in full support.
Thank you. All right, there are some recommendations that staff have brought forward. Councillor McLean.
I'll read to you. I will move recommendation 2 that council direct staff to apply for a grant opportunity to the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program 2020-2021 for the Wharf Avenue sidewalk construction. I'll also move recommendation 3 that council commit to funding this project using gas tax or a combination of gas tax and other opportunities as applicable to cover its 30% portion of the cost for this project, with the other 70% coming from the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program 2020 something for a total project amount of $685,074.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. And they've both voted in favor. Thank you very much. Then item 10.3, investing in Canada Infrastructure Program grant application for the Wakefield lift station replacement. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And back over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is seeking council approval to apply the Investing Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, Green Infrastructure second intake, and the financial commitment from Sechelt, $232,230. That is 26.67% of the total estimated project cost, $870,750. This is the background information. The district previously applied to Investing Canada Infrastructure Program Rural and Northern Communities, ICIP RNC, in early 2019. The program is still is not awarded, but district application is not guaranteed for that particular grant. So that's why the staff suggesting to apply this grant, recommending to apply this grant. So Wakefield lift station has suffered several failures previously, various failures at electrical and pump failures and other rusting failures, different various failures, resulting in sewage discharge into ocean. District conducted several investigations to determine the cause of failures, and it was determined existing wet well is undersized, contains issues due to a faulty electronic issues, threatened by climate change, sea level rise and storm surge, and its infrastructure is too old to update. The replacement and upsize is required for current use and the future growth. Other consideration, existing wet well has been damaged by sulfide attack, and existing electrical control kiosk has suffered massive rusting. A significant portion of the West Sechelt ties into this pump station, and future infill areas will serviced by this pump station, and the future developments in West Sechelt are unlikely to proceed without this replacement. So you can see that some pictures previously occurred, and you can see here, due to the erosion, the all electrical wiring all exposed, and this is the rusting of electrical kiosk due to marine environment. And also you can see here the rusting also area, and there's a bunch of hydrogen sulfide attack and deteriorate in the concrete wet well. So these are the design consideration: increase wet well and pump size to handle current and future growth, increase wet well resistance to chemicals, raise pump station to accommodate climate change best practices. So this one we will consider 2060 or 2070 sea level rise, and we have raised the pump station area. All new kiosks to be marine grade and tied into water resource center with SCADA system. Now this is we are currently exploring. None of our lift stations not connected to SCADA. This is the one we are proposing now to connect to the SCADA. Electronic flow meters, and this is also we don't have yet. That is the continuous data transmitting to water center through SCADA system. That is continuation 24 hours. So then we have that information, and also if we introduce this SCADA system, the chief operator can operate through app at home. So they don't want to be here. They know that flow, everything they want to manipulate at home. So uninterrupted power supply via a standby generator, and improved existing viewpoint. There's a viewpoint over there, and we can improve the viewpoint for 12 Bay Island. And temporary bypass, we need the temporary bypass pump station during construction because it's live. This is a financial implication. The total estimated construction cost, 870,750, and eligible contribution from Investing Canada Infrastructure Program is 73.33, that is 638,520. And the district contribution from source DCC and 1% municipal assist factor, that is total 26.67, is total cost for our contribution 232,230. That is the end of presentation. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions by councillors? Councillor Toth.
I'm going to channel the Area E Regional District Director with this question. Is there any ability for us to relocate the lift station further uphill to deal with sea level rise, shoreline erosion, and storm surge? Like it's mentioned in there, the idea of raising it, but is that going to be enough?
The problem is there's two accesses, there's two residential on both sides a little bit up. So it is difficult to bring the lift station to uphill. So instead, we proposing to raise the retaining wall by 1.5 meters. That is adequate for 2060, 2070 sea level rise.
2070, 50 years. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we have some recommendations in front of us. Councillor Toth.
I'd like to move recommendation 2, that council direct staff to apply for the second intake of the grant opportunity Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Green Infrastructure to replace and expand the capacity of the existing sanitary sewer pump station at Wakefield Road. And recommendation 3, that council commit to funding this project using sewer DCCs or a combination of DCCs and sewer reserves to cover its 26.67% portion of the cost of this project, with the other 73.33% coming from Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Green Infrastructure, for a total project amount of $870,750.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any other comments, questions? Just a process question for staff. I know that when we send in these applications, we typically will notify our MP. Is that something that we need to do a motion on, or will that automatically be taken as part of the process?
It's automatic for us now. We don't need a resolution.
Thank you. So I know we did talk to them about this when we met with him last week, because this had come forward. Councillor Toth.
I just wanted to mention, in case anyone was curious to know where 73.33% comes from, it's a combination of the federal government putting up money and the provincial government putting up money. I'm not sure which one's which. One of them does 40% and the other one does 1/3.
All right, so we have a recommendation on the floor. Any other questions? No? All those in favor of the recommendations?
Aye.
All right, and they both voted in favor. Thank you very much. Councillor McLean.
I'm going to throw in an extra recommendation. The state of this is quite something. Let's put it that way. And applying for grants is quite a challenge in that we may or may not get them. So the motion that I have is kind of a backup plan. So the motion is that staff present alternative funding sources in the event that we do not receive grant funding for this project as part of the 2020-2025 budget process.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Any questions, comments? Councillor Toth?
I really don't see how we can afford to build it on our own, so hopefully we get a grant. But welcome the information for sure to help make the decisions.
Any other questions or comments on the recommendation on the floor? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, and they're both in favor as well. Thank you. Item 10.4. Thank you. Airport runway resurfacing and extension capital project. Yeah, Mr. Curry's back. First of all, motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you.
Aye.
Mr. Curry.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. My report today provides the tender results for the airport runway and resurfacing project. In December 2019, Council resolved to request further grant funds from the BC Air Access Program to complete the airport project. In the report to Council in December, we did not release our expected costs due to the tender process being open. The tender closed on January 10, 2020, and the results were successful. We received 6 bids, and the total construction costs are $174,000 below the consultant's estimate. The consultants have recommended that we provide a letter of intent to award the contract to Jake's Construction, contingent on grant approval, council approval, and the successful public consultation period as required by Transportation Canada. The results of the bid have been provided in the report. The total cost of the overall project is $3,184,937. This is up from the original estimate of a project of $1.38 million. That's an increase by $1.79 million. To break this down, just for information, the cost to just repave just the existing runway as it is, so this is splitting the project into two parts, would be $1.543 million to just resurface and repave the existing runway. And the extension would cost 0.827 million, so 827,000. At this time, we're not asking for any decisions, and this report is for information only. Once the results of the grant are received, we will bring a report back to council and provide options and recommendations to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of staff at this point? Councillor Toth.
Thank you for bringing this report forward. It's amazing how much this project just keeps climbing and climbing in cost. It looks, just my understanding here looking at these numbers, is that our portion of the cost is going to be around $790,000.
That's correct. So the amount that has been allocated in 2019 is $346,000 of gas tax, and the new ask for 2020 will be $449,000.
An additional $449,000.
An additional $450,000 is required to complete the project.
Thank you.
You have your finger close to your microphone. Did you want to say something?
I was going to say that so far we've utilized gas tax for that number in the grant application. But as it comes back through council for final approval, if we get the grant, we can alternate it out or put another funding source in.
Thank you. I think we all understand that when the initial work was done, the initial budget amount that we went forward with, we hadn't actually had the engineers come out and look at the state of the current airport runway. We assumed at that point that we could just replace the asphalt on the piece that we have. And once the engineers came out and actually looked at the airport runway, they found that in doing that, we would actually have to do a lot of work to the substructure of that to make that go forward. And that and the aprons that they've now added in, saying if we're doing the runway, we should also do the aprons at the same time, has brought the cost up. Councillor Toth.
Was there any consideration given, sorry, it's not all in the back of my head right now, was there consideration given to splitting up earthworks and runway works, and was there any consideration given to breaking the project into smaller pieces? I recognizing that airport lighting and airport runway paving and things like that may be a fairly specialized task, but I would imagine that a lot of the earthworks and things like that could be done by local contractors, right?
That's correct, and in some cases the recommended tender bid that we received is utilizing some local contractors as subcontractors within their bid. So yes, and then to answer your first question, yes, you may see some options to change the project depending on what's approved by the BC Air Access Program when this comes back to you again. So we will be looking at different options if we have to piece the project together to make a recommendation on what we can get done with the funds we have available.
Thank you. Anything from Councillor Scott or Councillor Rowe?
Yeah, it's Eric here. I agree that there's challenges with this one. The tender that was created does show some pieces that we can split out to bring the cost down. I still think we need to move forward with the idea that this is a regional airport and there needs to be other contributors from the other governments into this, and maybe we need to just create the recommendation to put that ask out there. That airport is used by everybody on the Lower Sunshine Coast, and it shouldn't just be the district that Sechelt pays for it.
Thank you. that could probably wait until we hear back from around the grant, because that will have a huge impact on what we'd be looking for to make that go forward. But at that point, you could include that in your recommendations that come forward. Councillor McLean.
Well, I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Scott.
I think we need to get started on it as, you know, maybe it's too late for the SCRD budget, but even for the Gibson's budget, just to get the juices flowing, that it's there, and they need to consider it.
So would you like to make a recommendation?
Sure. I recommend that the district Sechelt write a letter to the SCRD and the Gibson's, the town of Gibson's, requesting help in funding this airport resurfacing to come up with some matching funds to our contribution towards creating an airport that is utilized by the whole Sunshine Coast.
Could we include the Sechelt Nation in that?
You betcha. Add everybody.
Okay, so that's a recommendation. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? 3 of them seconded it. Okay. All right.
The reality is, you know, the airport is used by everybody. With a longer runway, we have access to medevac. Medevac is used by everybody, not just the district of Sechelt. So it really is not just the district of Sechelt's airport.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay. So it's moved and seconded. Councillor McLean?
Yeah, so I'm in support of this, but we're kind of a victim to history here. This used to be a shared airport between Sechelt and Gibson's, and at some point, Gibson's got out. And left us with the bill. So I want to see them come back. That would be great.
All right, any other comments on this one? All those in favor? And they're both in favor on the screen as well. And I know, Jen, you're watching that as well. So unanimous support for that one. Thank you for that. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, I just got a little piece to say about the airport. I'm struggling with this project personally. For this year's budget, my personal priority is to take care of our house and to fund the basics that government does. It's really easy to think that the airport's a nice to have, something that we don't need to invest in. But the fact of the matter is that we own this airport, the district of Sechelt owns this, and it's our asset. It's in poor condition right now, and just like our roads, we need to sometimes repave it. The difference here is that if we expand the airport, the province is willing to kick in 75%, which is pretty great. So last time we discussed this, I attempted to reduce the size of the project. This time we are awarding a contract. Next time we're going to have to figure out how to fund this. Our infrastructure gap in the district of Sechelt is too large, and I don't want this airport to take away from other important capital works projects that we desperately need. So next meeting, I'll be asking for funding options, including a tax increase at our next budget meeting. Since this is just an awarding of the contract, that's fine right now, but we need to have some serious discussions about how we fund this. And I believe the best path forward is a tax increase.
So that's direction to staff. Thank you. Yeah, comment. Well, we'll be looking for some information coming forward. All right. Anything else? Let's move on to our next item, 10.5, BC Energy Step Code Update. First, a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, he's just going to get the clicker.
Essentially, the building code will be changing towards 2032 with net zero buildings, net zero homes. And a couple of years ago, in fact, 2017, the province introduced the concept of the step code, and moving towards energy efficiency, gradual increases of the code. and it has been something that's been talked about. There was an unused allotment within the building department budget last year for bylaw rewrite for bylaw 409. But there's a process, a procedure to get towards the step code, and it's timely. The town of Gibson's and the Sunshine Coast Regional District are both interested in moving as well. There's long been talk about coordinating building bylaws and building standards on the Sunshine Coast. So planners and building inspectors have met in January to discuss a pathway forward for regional cooperation in this regard. And both SCRD and Town of Gibson's have recently received staff reports, so this is number 3 of 3. We're meeting again next week to talk about how we can coordinate our efforts and move forward. So first step, of course, I'll quickly describe step code, but first step, of course, is to receive endorsement from council to move forward with the other local governments. And so at present, the step code is an optional compliance path towards this increasing building code. So it's taking various steps at a time to get there. Some municipalities have incentivized efforts, sponsored blow door tests, sponsored talks, industry-based consultation, etc. And so the step code doesn't say how you must build a house per se, but it's about making the house more energy efficient, using blow door tests, finding where the leaks are, identifying means of making buildings more efficient. So should we do this, and I recommend that we do, because if we don't take our steps, eventually at 2031, we'll be up against the wall, making all the moves at the same time. So the idea here is to build into it. So supposing we get council endorsement, we then notify the Energy Step Code Council that District of Sechelt is taking steps towards implementation of the step code. We'll do consultation. We've discussed this with the town of Gibson's and SCRD, how we might best approach that. We've reached out to energy modelers who are willing to come to the Sunshine Coast and give a talk to anybody, general public, because we still have owner builders in Sechelt, as well as industry-based. You know, we have builders on the Sunshine Coast who are building high-level, high-efficiency homes who are ahead of the regulators. So it's time to embrace that, we feel, and jump on board. And so we discussed a regional approach with local solutions. SCRD, primarily providing building inspection for rural areas, does not have as many of the commercial, industrial, public assembly type buildings you might see in Sechelt or Gibson's. So it's not the guarantee that all 3 building bylaws will be identical, but the concept is to take a regional approach towards it and look for some areas of common sense. And just some diagrams here. It's slightly different. Part 9, BC Building Code buildings are standard residential homes. And then Part 3 gets into commercial or concrete, higher density homes and whatnot. And so there's different steps that they'll take. So it's slightly, the building bylaw would have to define the difference between Part 3, Part 9 buildings, and so forth. And then the timelines. They're starting to kick in within a couple of years and full net zero by 2032. So that's a big challenge. Step 1 is optional. Step 1 is basically take the test. Do you pass? Yes, great. If not, here's some ideas that you could consider. Presumably, once one does take the test and they identify the areas of weakness within the dwelling, it only makes sense to implement and find improvements. And so we have these timelines. It's going to be increasing throughout the next 10 to 12 years. And it feels that now it is timely to move forward with our local government partners on the Sunshine Coast and move into step 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Toth, Councillor McLean.
I was actually indicating that Councillor McLean could go first, but too bad you already told me I could go, so here we go. I think this is great, the idea behind working towards net zero homes, net zero buildings. We need this, climate change and reducing our emissions and all of the things that we know we need to do. This is great. I'm glad there's a regional collaboration going on with this. You did mention that we do have high efficiency builders here on the coast already that are building to even higher standards than what's being proposed right now. We don't have the energy modelers here, though. And so through that, until we get them trained up and certified, we do lose some of that local control. You have to rely on somebody who's in Vancouver, Victoria, what have you, Nanaimo, wherever they may be, in order to certify your buildings and make sure that everything is to the province's plans. As we move further up the steps, I'm worried that it's going to be harder and harder or near impossible for people to be able to ever build their own homes. And I think that that's a real loss for our community.
Councillor McLean?
Yeah, the slide that we have presented right now, there's a timeline there. Is that the province's timeline, or is that what we're proposing for our timeline?
Yes, great question. Certainly province's timeline. At this point, we are proposing to commence, but don't have a firm timeline to get all the way through to net zero. So this comes from the Energy Step Code Council publications.
So I'm just trying to understand. So 2022, the building code is not changing. The province is just recommending that we implement step 2/3 by 2022. Like, is there any mandatory changes in 2022, I guess, is another way to phrase that.
Yeah, that's a good question. My understanding is the building code is changing. At this point, it's voluntary compliance, but there will be steps along the way where we have to get going. Yeah. If I may address Councillor Toth's comments, we understand through discussions with the building official group is that there is one individual who's working towards becoming an energy modeler. There's another construction company who's working towards having one on staff. Our hope is that opening this market will bring folks, right? In 2006, when the riparian area regulations came in, similarly, we had no identified qualified environmental professionals here, and there was a concern. At one point, we had no geotechnical engineers based on Sunshine Coast, and it was a struggle with development permits. And as these opportunities and markets open up, entrepreneurs are filling them. And that's our hope, right? That is a concern, and certainly across the board, building official folks echo the concern or the thought that this might push out the owner-builder.
Thank you. I'm going to make a couple of comments. So my husband was in the construction field for about 45 years. And out in Alberta, a lot of the things that are contemplated in here were just what we did. When we moved out here, and he was doing some building out here, things like wrapping the electrical boxes, builders out here hadn't heard of that. And it was just something that we did. So the climate out here allowed, particularly in the Lower Mainland, where the majority of the population lives, the climate allowed builders not to have to follow that because they didn't have the cold weather that we were dealing with in other provinces. So as these are coming forward, I remember when some of those initiatives were brought forward by the province here, shortly after we moved here, and the builders were up in arms about some of these things they had to do. So things like Kirlian photography, it's been out for years. When you talk about somebody, an energy modeler, back in, I want to say 2000, probably about 2010, there was somebody looking to move here from Nanaimo who did that, but there wasn't a need for it or call for it here. So I agree with what you're saying. This will bring the energy experts, the people that we need to do this work to the coast. And as with, for people not building their own houses, they'll be able to do it because they're doing it to these standards in other provinces. They're just not doing it here. They don't necessarily have the knowledge or the expertise, but could get it. So I don't think it's going to impact that. There's still a possibility. Could still happen. Councillor McLean.
I just want to speak to the bigger picture of this. There's two really important things that we're doing here. Aligning with the other governments. That's really good when it comes to in terms of building. And also, this is really good for climate change. Heating and providing electricity to buildings accounts for 30% of our CO2 emissions in Canada. That's huge. So if we can start bringing that down, that will have implications. However, I also want to recognize that we didn't really consider this in our strategic plan. And what we did consider is our zoning bylaw. So I want to remind staff that zoning bylaw is the first planning priority, and this can come after that, but still very important to work on.
I think staff are aware. One of the questions that isn't anticipated in here or considered in here, and I'm wondering if you've heard anything about the province looking at it, is retrofitting. So this is looking at new construction, and I'm sure that there's going to be all kinds of initiatives around that. But has there been talk about retrofitting and supporting people who are looking to retrofit to bring it up to code? And I'm particularly looking at funding support.
I have not. I do have a meeting next week with all the building officials, and happy to report back when I find out more. I'll certainly make note of that question.
Okay, and that could be something that could require some advocacy on the part of the elected officials moving forward. So if you find out anything and avenues that we can support that, given the age of the homes on the Sunshine Coast, I think any dollars that could be found to assist with moving that forward would be beneficial. Yes, yes, we have a few provincial and local area conventions coming up, right? So we can take some of that stuff forward. Any other questions or comments? So we have some recommendations in front of us. Councillor McLean.
I'm going to do the short version because I'm tired of reading. Recommendation 2, that we have intent to apply to the Energy Step Code, and recommendation 3, that we proceed with consultation.
In cooperation with the town of Gibsons and Sunshine Coast Regional District. Yeah, what it says there. All right, is there a seconder for those recommendations? Seconded? Any other comments? Councillor Toth.
I just wanted to add for anybody that may be following along at home that the reason the Sechelt Nation is not listed on here is because their building inspection services are covered off by the Sunshine Coast Regional District.
Thank you. Any questions from those hiding in my computer? No questions. All right. So we have 2 recommendations in front of us. All those in favor? Thank you.
Aye, let's go.
All right. So councillor reports. Let's start with the ones on the kind of in the ether. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. One more on our agenda. Sorry, jumping over it. I got it circled. All right, 10.6. Thank you.
I'll move that report, recommendation 1, that the report is received.
Okay. All those in favor of receipt? Thank you. And is anybody speaking to this one?
Yes, I am.
Oh. Thank you.
So there's an opportunity for a grant out there to deal with the reduction of poverty on the Sunshine Coast or within just the district of Sechelt. But we want to take the Sunshine Coast approach and include both the town of Gibsons, or the town of Gibsons, the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and the First Nations here as well. So we've sent letters out to ask them to provide motions that would identify the district of Sechelt as the lead on this project. But what that does is it allows us to apply for more funds. So if we were just going to do it as a community, the maximum we could apply for is $50,000. And if we're going to do it for a whole regional area, it is $150,000, which is what we want to apply for. So a couple of motions here that we want to act as the lead on this project and include the other governments on the Sunshine Coast. Do the whole region poverty reduction strategy, and we'll probably have a small committee of staff that will, like we did with the other 2 projects that are underway, or one that's finished tonight and the other project, have a small committee of staff that will move this forward and deal with consultants and all that.
Thank you. Councillor McLean?
I think you answered my question, but I'm going to put a question statement out. So again, zoning bylaws first priority, and I don't want to make this put too much strain on the planning department. So I'm hoping that we can rely on consultants to get this done, and I think from what I hear, that's part of the plan.
Yes, it is. Sorry.
Councillor Toth?
So you mentioned the staff time implications in there. I noticed here financial implications. This is not a matching grant. We don't have to put up any of our own money to deal with this.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think this has come forward through the efforts of Councillor Rowe. Would you like to speak to this?
Sure. Thank you. This comes out of a session that I think Janice and I attended at UBCM. There's two granting streams for the poverty reduction work. The one is for plans, and the second one would be for projects that you want to do in your community once you have a plan. So in other words, we can't apply for stream 2 until we have a plan in place. So it makes complete sense to do a regional plan because poverty exists across the Sunshine Coast. And we feel that there is support for that. So that's what where that has come from. And I think if we're successful and a year from now we have a poverty reduction plan coupled with our childcare plan and the housing needs assessment, I think we're going to be in a real good evidence-based information environment so that we can advocate and make sure that we're doing what we can at a municipal level to improve life on the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you. Councillor McLean, and then Councillor Toth, or Councillor Kuster.
Yeah, it's a long meeting, so just to follow up with what Councillor Rose said, something like this can have really good benefits for a community. The local governments of the Upper Sunshine Coast recently collaborated to hire a social planner. So that was actually the result of a similar study that they did a couple years ago. So that could be a cool outcome of this. And what that social planner does is it works on issues about housing for all, early childhood development, social cohesion, and poverty alleviation, in particularly working with community-based organizations. So I think that could be really cool, but first we need to do the study, and that will come up with its own recommendations that may or may not be similar.
Councillor Kuster.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I was with Brenda at UBCM, and I think this is something that the Coast needs. I'm really happy that we are going in with the other, like regional district, Town of Gibson's, gives us more power, more money to do this, and I think this is what we need. We have a huge issue with poverty in our community, so let's move this forward.
Councillor Toth?
Yeah, I'll move recommendation 2, that a grant application be submitted to the Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program to request funding to create a poverty reduction strategy for the Sunshine Coast in the amount of $150,000. And recommendation 3, that the District of Sechelt be the primary applicant to apply for, receive, and manage the Poverty Reduction Planning and Action Program grant funding on the behalf of the local governments.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you very much. Before we go to council reports, I just want to commend staff. If I look at the agenda today, I see 3 grant applications and another report indicating we're waiting for the results of another application. So thank you for reaching out to other levels of government and other organizations to support what we're doing here in the district. So now I get to go to the people in the ether with their councillor reports. And how about if we start with Councillor Scott and then Councillor Rowe, and then we'll come back to the room here.
Okay, attended the Davis Bay Community Association meeting. It was basically another conversation with Staff Sergeant Hallam on the same report that she gave us at council the last time. Well attended, lots of good questions. Yeah, so I look forward to keep going with that. I have received an email from Graham Moore tendering his resignation from the Harbor Committee. So I guess we need to make a resolution that council accepts Graham Moore's resignation from the Harbor Expansion and Development Select Committee. If somebody wants to.
Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. All right. And did you want to go on with your report?
What else was there? Oh, just at the Community Association Forum. Some great questions as well. Some interesting talk on infrastructure, so I'm looking forward to seeing how we can fit all that in the budget and not blow the tax increase out of the park. That's it for me.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Well, not too much considering I've been here since the 8th. We had, right before you left, we had a housing committee meeting, and I just want to commend actually Councillor McLean for his leadership on that committee. It's not often you're this early in a committee and you feel like you're actually getting some things done. That's been my experience. So that's really positive. And I'm just by the beach here in Costa Rica reviewing community investment applications. And I'll be back on the 29th. And special thanks to Jen and Bev for getting the Zoom going. Tom and I did a trial here before the last Committee of the Whole meeting to work the bugs out. So hopefully everything's sounding much better on your end.
It's great, and they're doing an awesome job. All right. How about if we start Councillor Kuster, and we'll come down this way.
Okay. What did we do? So also Brenda mentioned the Housing Advisory Committee meeting. I agree with Brenda. Matt's doing an amazing job leading us through. We have a great bunch of people. And at the last meeting, we kind of finalized a survey with respect to homeowners and garden suites. That survey is out on our district website and on social media. And I encourage people to look at it and fill it out. It's great collaboration there, and I think we're going to get some valuable information from it. Also, driving to work the other morning, heard it on Mountain FM, a little blurb about it, so that was kind of cool. So we definitely know it's getting out there. Then what else did we do? A few of us met with our MP, Patrick, with respect to some needs and wants and concerns in our district, and that he is going to bring those back to the government. And hopefully we'll have some positive results from that, fingers crossed. And I also attended the community association meeting, and yeah, it was great to listen to the questions and the concerns from our community associations, and it'll be interesting to see what comes through at budget. And lastly, my last little spiel here for Chatlet grad fundraising. Tomorrow night is the last fundraising, so come out and support the grads at the Lighthouse if you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Toth.
I attended LGLA, which is why I wasn't able to participate in the last council meeting and the public hearing that we had. I do have a report that I'm wordsmithing from LGLA, and hopefully I'll have it. Local Government Leadership Academy. It was held in Richmond this year, and hoping I'll have a report in for council before the next council meeting. Attended the Grantham's Hall reopening on Friday. It's a super neat little building that's been a hub of the Grantham's neighborhood for over 80 years. With the renovations that were undertaken, it'll be hopefully a community hub for another 80 years. And I thought it was super heartwarming, cool, neat, whatever you want to say. There's a little boy who came out to the opening I don't know, he was probably 5 or 6, whose name was Grantham. Yeah, met with Patrick Weiler, talked about some local issues. Impressed with him. Hopefully he can carry forward our local concerns and do some good work in Ottawa on our behalf. Met with the Sechelt Legion earlier today about some early planning on their move and their renovation that they're looking to do. And the last thing, actually, on my way in this evening, I picked up this brochure and mailing envelope. This is an initiative from the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. You can register with them online, and you can send in your old smartphones. If they're new enough or good enough, they give them to blind people in need to help them safely identify their medications, get around and keep in communication with their families. If the phones aren't suitable, they're sold for recycling, and the monies are used to help purchase phones. I just wanted to highlight that effort because I think it's a great initiative, and you can pick these up actually just in the library foyer.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
All right. Earlier today, we had a school tour for Connecticut Elementary students in grade 4 and 5. It was a lot of fun. At the end of the tour, we did a mock council meeting. So they all elected councillors and mayor, and we went through a planning application together. And it took a while, but they got into it. And we taught them government, which they had fun with, which is amazing. I love that. It did. They approved the application. It was for a made-up splash park, so I think the odds were pretty good that that would pass. Well, last weekend I attended a Ferry Advisory Committee planning meeting. So right now the committee has a big focus on streamlining the medical assured boarding process. There's a whole lot of confusion about it in the community. BC Ferries is putting out conflicting information with itself. So we're going to try and do some strong advocacy on that. Now, in the past, the Ferry Advisory Committee would meet publicly with BC Ferries. And it would be 2 meetings a year, and that would be it. We are going in a direction where we're going to do a couple private meetings and come up with a solid ask, a united ask. So the committee is on the same page, and we can make our advocacy much more effective. So I'm really looking forward to what this committee can achieve when we work together more than twice a year. Housing committee, that meeting was mentioned already, but I got a couple more things. At a previous council meeting, we had a resolution that the committee can appoint members up to the full slate. That has been done. So Ian McDonald is joining the committee. He's from the Coast Community Builders Association. Colin Stansfield of Scredo. McInnes. My bad. Ian McInnes from the CCBA. Colin Stansfield from Scredo, the Sunshine Coast Regional Economic Development Organization, and Kayla Feenstra, who is now a citizen of the Sunshine Coast. So the 3 of them have joined. We are now back up to our full slate of 9 members for that committee, which is exciting. So they'll join for us for the next meeting, and I'll actually know Ian's name after that. Now, the Housing Advisory Committee did make one recommendation, which I'm going to present to Council. So that recommendation is that the committee recommends a change to the OCP to modify DPA 8 to remove language pertaining to freestanding rental suites. Specifically, DPA 8 applies to any property designated in the District of Sechelt OCP or zone for any new forms of infill development housing, such as laneway housing, granny flats, cottages, coach houses, or carriage houses over garage. So a little bit of context behind that. For the past few months, we have been discussing how the committee can promote creating garden suites or freestanding rental suites. And when we started to look at our existing process, we discovered that this section of the OCP essentially activates a development permit process. So anyone that wants to add the secondary unit to their house would need to go through the full development process, and we would rather see something that is more close to the development or to the building permit process. Welcome any questions. Yeah.
So how would you like us to proceed with this?
I think this is a fairly large change that the committee does not have authorization to make. So I'm looking for council to make either this recommendation or a similar recommendation to direct staff to begin work.
So it would be similar to something like that we request staff consider the recommendation put forward by the Housing Advisory Committee and bring back a report to council on possible amendments and implications of amendments.
That'd be acceptable to me.
Okay. Move that recommendation. Is there a seconder? Seconded. All right. All those in favor? Thank you. And Councillor McLean, go forward.
I'm done.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll do mine very quickly, and then we'll go on to the SCRD report. I was invited by the Canadian Federation of University Women as one of three to speak on women in leadership. Joining me were Poppy Hallam, the staff sergeant, and Jean Bennett, past dean of Capilano University. So they provided us with some questions, and we were to respond to those questions in a 10 to 15 minute speech, and then we had a round table or a question and answer period. So it was a 2-hour session. It was really good. It was attended by about 60 women in the community of all ages. Some and the marketing group at Capilano University actually set it all up and did the organizing and everything else, provided support. It was a great event. Going through the community after, I've had people come up to me and say, thank you. Thank you for what you said. I really appreciate that. I always find these kinds of speeches probably the hardest to do because it requires a lot of introspection, because they're asking me, like, what kinds of things are you looking to accomplish, right? So it becomes personal. So it takes me a long time actually to put it together, but it's really rewarding in the end. I also had an opportunity to attend the International Women and Girls in Science Day that the SCRD put on. They invited young women from all the high schools on the Sunshine Coast. In the end, the ones from Pender Harbor didn't show up. They were expecting them, but they didn't show up. But they had a room full, probably about 20 or 25 in grades 8 and 9, and then women in the regional district in various fields put on presentations about how they use science in their everyday jobs. So, for example, we had the Robin Cooper, who was with in the solid waste area, talked about the science behind the organics collection and the impacts on the the landfill, etc. We had the GIS people coming up and talking about how they use science in the graphical interface that we use here from the Sunshine, from the regional or the district of Sechelt as well. I could only stay for about the first hour, so I did an introduction, and as some of you know, I actually have a math background, so talked about how I use some of that. But it was really interesting. I would have loved to stay there for the rest of the day. They talked about what the numbers mean on the plastics, so I didn't know that. So it was interesting. So now you can go find out what that means. Last week, I attended a session up in Egmont. There was a community consultation with BC Timber Sales and Senko Logging, looking at getting initial input from the community on potential logging plans up in the area. There were two community groups that came and met with them. One was the Egmont Community Association, and the other was the North Lake Residents Association. It was really interesting in that, I mean, this is the first time I've ever seen BC Timber Sales and one of the other organizations they're working with come to the community at this stage in their plans. And the type of information that they received from the residents was very interesting. For example, North Lake, the houses that are on North Lake were initially water access only. And so when the road was put in, you actually have one of the houses that's 8 feet from the road, and some of the other houses that are there are built on rocks. They just built up rocks and put houses on top of them. So they mentioned this because they said they have a concern if there's logging roads going down this road, what it would do to the houses up there. So BC Timber Sales and Senco were frantically taking notes about all these different things so that they could take them and incorporate them into their plans when they're building all their roads. A couple of other things, steep slopes and some switchbacks and different kinds of things. So it started out a little bit antagonistic because the community wasn't aware of where the groups were in their planning. But as they realized that this was very preliminary, like we have blobs on a map at this point, pretty much, and we're just starting to do some on-the-ground truthing of the information, it turned it around. So, and through that, what they're going to do is they're going to come back to them, to these same groups, once they've actually done the preliminary information, to have them look at what they've come up with to see if there's other input that needs to be reflected in what the cutting is going to be. So it was very nice to be involved in that, and I think a lot of the community concerns have been allayed up there. I attended an elder ladies gathering here in the library, put on by the library. They gather once a month, and it was actually a goodbye for a couple on the Sunshine Coast who are moving away. Some of you will know Henry and Jill Hightower. They'll be moving away from the Sunshine Coast. They're leaving at the beginning of March. Due to some health issues, families requested they move down to the Lower Mainland. So it was kind of her last gathering here. And then I want to commend Councillor McLean for the idea and the work he put in with some of the staff with regards to the student meeting that we had today, the tour with the grade 4 and 5 from Kinnickinnick. As he said, we did a quick tour upstairs with them, came down here, and they actually sat here and actually took part around the audience. We seated a few questions. Councillor McLean was the developer, presented the idea. I was the staff presenting our concerns, things like traffic and water and everything else. And then they had questions, and it took them a bit to kind of get into, like, how do we do this? And then for the last 15 minutes, there were hands going up all around the room, and we actually had to cut it off so that they could leave. So they had a lot of fun, and we did too. It was a good time. Future counselors, that's right. When they were leaving, the teacher actually said, you should do this with the grade 11s and 12s. So that's my report. We'll go to Councillor Toth for his SCRD report.
So I spent almost the entire week last week in SCRD meetings, so I didn't have time to get the report in before the Friday deadline. But Jennifer was able to upload it to the document library pretty much as soon as I was able to send it in, so thank you, Jennifer, for that. The numbers that I've got in my report are very preliminary. They were calculated mostly on the fly during the budget meetings themselves. This budget is ambitious, it's bold, but after a lot of deliberation and back and forth, we really do feel that it's a necessary increase in investment, both in our community and in our infrastructure. Ultimately, the impact on the District of Sechelt tax bill will not be that significant. And I do have an example demonstrated in the report. Is very preliminary, these numbers, is draft until it's officially adopted. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And this will be uploaded to the website as well as part. It's a document library. Perfect. Thank you. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, at the SRD budget presentation for council, they had a really nice summary of everything that we're paying. So hopefully we can see that again with all the recent changes in round 2.
My understanding is that that will be coming forward as part of the communications. When the proposal came forward, or when the presentation was done, there were items that were not incorporated yet. There were staffing increases that were not fully committed to yet. It was incomplete information, but my understanding is that Tina will be bringing forward new information.
Thank you. All right, let's go to correspondence. Council correspondence 12.1, first motion to receive the correspondence, moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And there is one item on here for action. This Downtown Business Association is requesting a letter of support. They're looking to apply for a grant to do some work in Periwinkle Lane. How would you like to deal with this? Councillor McLean.
I would like to submit a letter of support. And I'll look to staff to see how much we need to commit in terms of some of the capital projects at this time. I'd prefer to just write a letter and figure out any budget implications later.
So a letter of support at this time is what you'd like? Okay. Motion for a letter of support, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Any other council correspondence items that you'd like addressed or want to speak to? Anything from Councillor Scott or Rowe? No? Okay. Any emergency items from staff? Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we'll say goodbye to you too on here. Councillor Scott, I know you're a few hours ahead of us.